The missing chapter. What did Helene do? How did I miss putting a chapter into the Name It and Claim It game? And tonight we're going to solve the mystery. I'm also going to read it to you, and we're going to follow the path of Helene's writing journey, my writing journey. I'm going to read to you the missing chapter, and then shortly you'll be able to download it as a PDF to keep for yourself. So if you already have the Name It and Claim It game, you will get the missing chapter for free. But you might be surprised where you find that information. If you have any questions and they're posted in tonight's live stream, I will be answering them after I cover the journey because we don't want to break the flow. So let's start with Helene and her journey. Now, her first book, The Name It and Claim It game, this edition, came out in 1971. I have yet to figure out how many printings there are because I have a third printing and then a misprint that was the seventh printing. And this was published by the Divorce and Company. Now it's spelled Devorss. Okay. I know that she got a lot of her information from her journals because she does refer to her journals many times throughout her journey. But I didn't get her journals. I have asked Dyke again for them. Maybe they survived, but I'm pretty sure they didn't survive. And they're nowhere to be had, unfortunately. They might be with her tarot cards because I'm just saying they're also lost. She does talk about them in several books. And he believes she left those in Peru. So Way of the Dodo, those books are. But she published this one in 1971, was the first printing. And it was with this company, and it was very small. And I want to, and I will be doing some comparisons later, because the reason I started doing this video is I made the mistake of reading my Amazon reviews, which I've been told every author shouldn't read the reviews. But there was one that irked me because it said I removed the Norman Vincent Peale teachings out of her books, and I know I didn't. And so I wanted to do this. But, you know, this is why I wanted to do this, because I wanted to debunk any myths about what she wrote and what I wrote. So this was the very first edition that she had, and I'll be doing a comparison later. Then there's a massive gap of time, almost 20 years. The next edition that came out was the Name It and Claim It game in 1988. Now, this was published by Top of the Mountain Publishing. Top of the Mountain Publishing was owned by Tag Powell. Okay. Now, Helene met Tag through Jose Silva. So if you remember, in this edition, she talks about Jose Silva as her friend. And he was the one that created the Silva method and also wrote the book, The Silva Mind Control Method. It's also been being taught by Silva International and also Mind Valley. Now, Tag Powell himself was a Silva instructor, and he wrote, and I don't have the first edition right now because we're working on updating it because I'll also be doing his books. He wrote the Silva Mind Mastery Method. And this was the update for the 90s. So it's the second edition. We're going to be publishing the third edition in 2024. But he also wrote Money and You, which will be republished this year, and Think Wealth. Okay, so this is where the missing chapter comes in, because the chapter there is one chapter in this book that does not appear in this book. Okay. Then this went out of print. This was 1988. And I don't know how many they printed or if there was second runs Unfortunately, Tag has passed away, and he'd also had a stroke and had COPD. So his memory when I met him was a bit Swiss cheesy. And so some of the questions that I asked about his history with Helene, he didn't remember, which was a shame because he would have been a wealth of information if he could have remembered. Then she started printing it at home. And you got to remember, it's 2003. The computers and the technology 20 years ago was very different than it is today. And the internet wasn't what it was. I'm very lucky. This one's autographed by her. And she used to basically print these at home or photocopy them at the local store and then Surlocks them. And if you mailed her, I think it was $12. I think she has in here, it's $12. She would mail you a book. I just love this. This is just so, and she kept updating it. So there's some updates in here. So what happened in this book is the first part. So you'll see if you go through it, this edition, she has part 1 is all of this edition, except for one chapter, which I figured out later. Part 2, and part 3 were added. Okay, so part 2 and 3 were new to this edition and did not appear in her first edition. I mean, you can tell by the thickness of the books. Okay, in this one, it's all of this, and she added an update here. Okay, so she continued to add to it, and there's actually even a couple of more stories in here. What she did was, because the technology wasn't there and she also wasn't techie, she would use like WordPerfect or Word back in the day, and just with the space bar and the return key, I loved it, would add on to chapter. Like if she had a story idea, she didn't know how to edit like I do now with much more modern technology. So you have to give her credit. She had, she didn't have the modern technology. And so instead of like moving chapters or reformatting, she would just add things onto the end of chapters or tack on new pages, right? I have the capability of moving chapters easily, bringing stuff in, reformatting. I mean, I've done this so many times now, I can almost do it with my eyes closed. And I wanted to show it to everybody, but of course I put things in a safe spot and I can't remember where the safe spot is. When I bought the rights from Dyke to republish all of her work, he sent me in the files a CD, and it was the 2010 edition of the Name It and Claim It game. So she kept updating this from 2003, and she kept updating it till the year she passed away. She never stopped teaching. I love that about Helene, that she never stopped teaching. She never stopped wanting to help people reach their full potential. So that's what I edited off of. So what I did was I took her 2010 edition and I put it into this format. Then I went through this edition and this edition and took all the things that were added or were different from the 2010, along with several articles that she had sent me to share with everybody, and put them all together. So this edition at the back has the same. So I added, a dedication, an affirmation, how I met her, my foreword, and then her book begins. So this part 1 is the same as the 1988. It's this. And then part 2 and part 2 is that. And then part 3 is is the end of this. Okay. So then what I started doing was the Audible edition. And I discovered something that I did not expect. And that was speaking the book is completely different than reading it. So I had to start moving some things around. Okay, so what I did was, for example, what I did was she had the Supreme Test. And then in this edition, she had Physician Heal Thyself. So I added it in after the Supreme Test because it made sense. She had an accident. She used the Silva method. Then she had another incident with her health and she used it again. But one was in the 70s and one was in the 80s. And so there was a huge time jump. And the editor, the engineer that was helping me with the audiobook said, that doesn't make sense. It needs to follow her timeline of her age and how she wrote it. So you can't, so when you're reading the book, it doesn't seem that odd. But when you're listening to the book, it seems very out of place. Who knew? I'm learning, right? This is what we do through life. We do something, we go along, we get better at something, we shift, we update. And that's the beauty of print on demand. I can move something, I can fix the book, boom, it's updated. Easy peasy. So I moved this extra chapter that was in this one that she did not have in this one or this one, and added it in. So now what you have is, if you order this book, you'll see there's 4 sections. You'll see that I have an intro, then there's her original book, then sections 2 and 3 are what she added into this book. And then there's a bonus, a part 4, where there's a bonus materials of all the stuff that I found in all the extra editions that weren't in the first 2. And then I have like some closing, like I have an afterword, recommended reading, and I have something about the authors, just standard book stuff like you'd find at the back of, like about the author, right? She even had it in this book, right? So I wanted to add that into the book too. So that's what I did. But as we were recording, and this is when I figured out that she had changed some things. So we're recording and he'd asked me a question. I wish I could remember the specific question, but I'm like, wait a minute, that seems weird. I didn't have anything to reference. So the next time I came back to the studio, I brought all the books and we sat and we looked. And then I realized there was a chapter in here that wasn't in the other books. I'm like, uh-oh. Okay. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to go on to my path. And then you'll see where we converge. So, and how Helene met me. In 2000, and this is why it's important, and Helene even talks about this, is you have to follow the breadcrumbs. You're going to be giving guidance because some people say, what is my purpose? Right? Why am I here? What am I doing on earth? What's my journey all about? Well, that's what I was figuring out at one point in my life. What was I going to do specifically? I had found myself unemployed in the .com bubble because I was in marketing and I had worked for all kinds of IT companies. And of course, when that bubble burst, I was out of work. The marketing department was all let go in one day. And then because all my experience had been in tech, I was very hard to jump industries. Nobody was hiring. There was so many marketers and salespeople and techies, and everybody was out of work. And I was 10 months unemployed. I then found the hobby of sweepstakes. which was great. We didn't have any kids yet. And I started entering sweepstakes as a hobby. And I started a contract with Krispy Kreme donuts, and I got pregnant. Everything happened at the same time. So when my contract finished, I just became a stay-at-home mom. My husband and I had a business at the time, and I just started doing all the back end stuff. Social media marketing was just kind of glimmering, online things, websites and newsletters and email lists and that kind of stuff. Small businesses were just really starting to pick that up more and more. And then, and of course, I was a mom and a homemaker. We all know that's a full-time job on its own. And after about 2 years, I thought, okay, it's time for me to go back to work. But I really liked being at home, and I didn't want to, put her in daycare all day. And I thought, what can I do to work from home and still provide and yet also be with my daughter? Well, I had gone on a winning streak, and several people asked me, what is your secret? Well, what I had done was taken my marketing background and my IT background and combined it with the hobby, because I understood it, because sweepstakes is one component of marketing. It's a tool that a lot of companies use as part of their marketing plan. And so I understood the hobby from both sides of the table. So I created this system to be organized and find things. And I went on this winning streak, and everyone said to me, you should write a book. I thought, I don't know if that's a good idea. So I started doing some research, and one person said to me, why would you give away all your secrets? I thought, that's a good idea. Oh, I digress. I left out a part. So one of the things we'd done was win a trip to LA to hang out with Bob Bloomer. Now, if you don't know who he is, he was on Food Network, and he had a cooking show. And so we went down to LA and had dinner with him. But I am of the mind, and we actually went to his house. We had the people from the studio there and the publisher and everybody. So there was about, 6 of us. And of course, they don't want to just let random contestants show up at the house. But anyway, we had talked on the phone, and he was going to do like a small courses throughout the night. And he was, I believe it's pronounced audiophile, wine collector. He had a huge collection. So I did some research, and we brought him down a bottle of ice wine. I baked him some cookies, and I put them in a Lego tin, and I bought him some of those really funky salad servers. You can get them everywhere now, but back then they were hard to find. I brought them from British Columbia. They were the bear paw salad scoopers. So I took all that with me. And so during that night, he said, this is the center of my universe. And he was referring to the space in front of his butcher block where he would stand and cook and create all the things for his books. And I was like fascinated, because he didn't have a degree in culinary expertise. He was an art student. That's what he went to university for. And he loved food, though. And he was the one that created these meals with his friends. What they would do is they'd all pitch in $5 each, or a couple of bucks each. They'd all go shopping. They'd all contribute something. They'd cook this fabulous meal, and then everyone would sit and have this feast once a week. And he took that and he turned that into a cookbook. And that's what kind of got his career going in this other direction. Plus, he was also doing art for chefs. I think he did some for Emeril Lagasse. Kind of cool. So during that night, he said, this is the center of my universe. And he said it twice. And the first time I thought, that's a little strange to be telling strangers. And the second time I thought, that's a message for me. I knew it was a message. That was an intuitive hit, as some people say. When I came home to ask my friend about it, she said, what's the middle of your universe? And I went, contesting. And I thought, what am I supposed to do with contesting? Then I got asked the question about, the suggestion was to write the book. So then I was going back to the same friend to talk about this. And I took a different route to her house. And there was a church with a service announcement board that said, you can't lose helping others win. I thought, that's the answer. I just knew, again, another intuitive hit. That was the answer. I need to go down this path. I don't know what's down this path. I'm going to go down this path. following the breadcrumbs. This is what scares a lot of people, is stepping into the unknown. I don't know what's down that path, but frankly, we really don't know what's down any path. We think we do, but we don't. So why not just follow your gut and go on an adventure? Because as Helene calls it, name it and claim a game. It is a game. The whole thing's a game. And she even recommends in one of her books, she read Florence Scovel Shinn's book, The Game of Life and How to Play It. There you go. So I think she might have been inspired by Florence. So I decided, instead of going back to work, I was going to become an author and write a sweepstakes book. So I started doing research, and I started discovering there was a lot of differences between Canada and the US. And at that time, I did not know how to write one book for the vast market. So what I did is I came out with the Canadian edition of You Can't Win If You Don't Enter. Now, this was supposed to be purple, but I don't know what happened to the printer. It came out gray. Welcome to 2006 printing technology. And I got the name of the book because I didn't know what I was going to call it. And when I was interviewing Scott, he worked for the Marco Group, which I don't know if they exist anymore. They used to do a lot of prize fulfillment and mailing. If you go to my Contest Queen YouTube channel, you will see a video there from the 80s that I found and had digitized to share. And it shows the old companies that used to do all the mail-in, receive all the mail-in entries and how they do the drawings and things. That's what they used to do. Anyway, he said he entered and he didn't win very often. I said, wait, hold up, you enter? And he said, well, you can't win if you don't enter. And I went, that's the name of the book. So I came out with the Canadian edition. And then 2 years later, I came out with the American edition. And this is when I met Helene, because this came out in 2008. And at that time, everyone was saying, you got to do a podcast, which is kind of ironic because now is the time everybody's doing them. But I had a podcast in 2008 called With the Contest Queen. And every 2 weeks for a couple of years, I would interview the movers and the shakers in the sweepstakes industry. I interviewed companies that ran giveaways. I interviewed the websites. I interviewed the fellow sweepers and all kinds of things, marketers. And it was pretty good. Now, unfortunately, I did not have the foresight to download and copy all of those interviews before I lost access to all of them. And then some of them I deleted because I was running out of space, because it was a plan and the technology kept changing. And so very sad that I did that. It would have been nice to have all of them, but hindsight's 2020. Anyway, so that's how I met Helene. And that story, this whole story is in the beginning of this book, right? It's called My Adventures with Helene. So I talk about that. So I had her, of course, everybody, so I had read this book in probably, I don't know what year. My husband found it. It was a vintage book by then because it was out of print. I think it was after 2003, or it was around 2003, because this is the editions she was printing herself. But everybody knew her because, of course, she won a fully furnished home, and that's kind of the holy grail. I mean, that's even beyond a car, right? That's the holy grail of all sweepstakes prizes. So I wanted to talk to her. So I invited her on the podcast. Now, I was a terrible interviewer in those days. I don't know. I know I'm much better. I'm not as good as some people that I see, but just like anything, you get better with practice. Anyway, I was a terrible interviewer. I had her on this podcast. I have people complaining sometimes the volume is up and down and you can't hear her, or I'm too loud. But people don't understand. Back in those days, to run a podcast, you had a landline and she had a landline, and we both phoned into this central station online, and I had a dashboard on my computer, and I would hit go live, and then we would talk on the phone, and it would get recorded by this server. There was no control. There was no microphones. There was no headsets. There was no, the shields, whatever. There was nothing. You're talking. We were talking on a landline, and I didn't even have a corded landline. I was using my wireless landline, cordless phone. The cord, yeah, it was like, and she had an old, tied with a cord phone. So it was something. Anyway, I had her on, and off air, because it was just like doing a podcast here where or a web show, you'll see a lot of people say, oh, we were talking off air, because, for example, I use StreamYard, and in StreamYard, you can sit and talk before you hit the go live button. And so I was talking to her off air, and I was so cheeky. I said, can I come visit you? And she said, no. And I was like, all right, I shot my shot. 3 days later, she phones me back, and she says, your guides are so loud. You better come down. Now, we're going to get back to how she could see in the fourth dimension, because no, it's this way. There's a book called In Contact with Other Realms. That should be a hint right there. So that's when I went down. I went down in November of 2008, and it was amazing. But it's funny because we all get better as we age. At least I think we do. And we mature. And the questions, if I had spent 4 days with her at this age, I would be asking her completely different questions. The conversations would have been way different than they were back then. But at some point, she said to me, you need to teach Maneuvers for Witchcraft, because no one's going to do it. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but that's the subtitle of the book, Maneuvers for Witchcraft. Okay. And so I said, okay. And then I had a very dark night. Like, my life just did this after that. I was getting a divorce, and we went bankrupt, and we nearly lost the house. And it was just, and then I had health issues. And then it was like one thing after another. And then I never did anything with it. And it was and because I had such turmoil, I didn't keep in touch with her as much as I would like. I did get some of the articles and things, and I talked to her a little bit, but it wasn't until 2 years after she passed, I figured out she passed, because everything was in such turmoil. Like, I had been wanting to write. By then I had figured out, because people are like, oh, we want an updated edition of your book. And I realized I knew how to combine the Canada and the US thing, but everything was just down. And so I didn't do anything with anything. In 2016, I finally came out with How to Win Cash Cards, Trips, and More. This is the second edition of You Can't Win If You Don't Enter. By then, I had figured out how to combine Canada and US. And so this is like just one edition, because 80% of the book's the same except for the resources. And I just put both resources in. And then what I did in this one was I put new stories, new resources, new tips, updated things, put in social media. There was no social media in these editions because it really wasn't a thing back then. And so, because I think I started on Twitter in 2009. I mean, that was a year after this book came out. And so I put social media in this book. So I didn't do anything with it. Finally, in 2019, I know, like 11 years after she asked me, I know I took my sweet time, didn't I? I said to George, my current beau, I said, I need to do something with this before Dyke dies, because when I had met Helene, her son Chris had passed away, and her daughter Pamela had passed away. I don't know how much longer before. Pamela had, I think, brain tumor, and Chris passed away. He had like COPD and maybe cancer too. Dyke told me, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember. In 2008. So I don't know what year Pam passed, but Chris passed away in 2008. So she had 2 kids pass before her, and Pat had already passed. So the only 2 left in the family were Dyke and Helene. And then in 2010, she passed away. So he was the only one left. Oh, I didn't mention. So this was done by Top of the Mountain Publishing. So this is when she started her own company. This one was published by Delta Sciences. And thankfully, Dyke was the president of that company. So he was able to sell me the rights through that company for this. So I contacted him finally in 2019. And apparently other people had also wanted to buy the rights, but I think he also intuitively knew that she had said something, and I think he was just waiting for me to get off my butt and do something. So I bought the rights, and in 2020 came out with this edition. Now, I didn't look at this book when I wrote my edition. I went off the 2010 disc I got, pulled stories out of the 2003 edition, and double checked the 1988 edition. And then upon doing the Audible book, and we started referencing this book, I was like, uh-oh. Actually, I should also say, I think one of the reasons Helene asked me is she had this book. This one came out 6 years after she passed away. I think the other reason she asked me to do it was because this is a contesting / metaphysical kind of mindset positivity book. And this book is too. I don't have as much. This is a lot of how to win, but I have a chapter in here called Attracting Luck. And it's how to be lucky. And I refer to a lot of the same teachers that she refers to. Like I have, expectations, the law of attraction. I have a whole section on Norman Vincent Peale. Now, if you remember, Norman Vincent Peale's book, The Power of Positive Thinking, is the book that she read that set her on her winning path. And I'm referencing Norman Vincent Peale in this book. So she knew that I understood both sides of the table. In this sense, it's the sweepstakes mindset, the winning mindset, and the positivity mindset. Because you have to think like a winner and feel like a winner before you are a winner. There you go, right? So working with the audio producer, I was going through and realized we were missing a chapter. So I just want to show people how I kept the book the same. So if we go through after my introduction and affirmations, we have introduction. I called it introduction number 1 because there's now 3 introductions in the book. So we have introduction number 1, the name it and claim it game. I'll add these scans to the blog post I'm doing. I just realized I should do that. Okay, so now she said, let Dyke win this one. He's more patriotic than I, but she changed it to let Big Brother win this one. And then the subtitle is he's more patriotic than I, but it's a subtitle, so it's not in here. All things come to him who waits. She changed it. It was yes, you can. This is yes, yes, you can. Now act surprised. They expect it. How to be successful without really trying. Hunches are the handiest things. The supreme test. What is taking you so long? That is the chapter I didn't have. Maneuvers for witchcraft. And then in this edition, she added spec. Okay. So, and that's where I had added physician heal thyself. That one is now in the bonus material because Amazon likes the books to match Audible as closely as possible. So I had to change the book to match the Audible because the closer it is, the better they like it. But I did make minor changes too. So for example, Helene starts with, I have an exciting challenge for you, dear reader. So when you're doing it on Audible, you have to say an exciting challenge for you, the listener. So there's lots of little things, or sometimes I'll refer to like this picture, for example. She refers to this picture that her grandson drew, but I can't talk it. I mean, you can't see it. So I have to say, so it says in the book, this is a copy of what he submitted. And instead I say an example of what her grandson submitted can be found in the PDF attached to this audiobook. And then I keep reading. Do you have to make changes like that? Or when I talk about links, I just say it can be found on this website, and I read the website. Like I don't say the HTTP, but for example, I say something, there's something in here about if you want to learn more, you can go to wordsforwinning.com. And then all the links and all the reference material I put in the PDF attached to the audiobook. So then it's easy for people. They can just click. Then I realized, what's taking you so long? I was like, uh-oh, I missed a chapter. And I'm thinking, do I put a whole new chapter in? I mean, we're almost finished the audiobook. It's really difficult. Then I started reading it and discovered that the story really wasn't sweepstakes based. And based on the thickness of this and all the additional material she wrote, I believe her and Tag had a really intense, like book editing session to decide what was in and what was out. And unfortunately, they're not around to ask. But I believe they felt that it wasn't going to enhance this book. If you've read this book, In Contact with Other Realms, you are going to recognize a lot of what I read. So she basically took this story, the missing chapter, updated it, and put it in Contact with Other Realms. And that is the chapter called The Messenger. All right. So in a way it was missing, but in a way it's not. But it is a bit different. So I am going to read it. Now what's interesting is I'm going to read. Now look what's happened to this book. It's so old and I've referenced it so much doing all my work with her. It's cracked. But that's okay. And one of the things I wanted to show you is one of the tricks I learned when you do an Audible book is I use my iPad. Because on the first session that I had, he said, bring it. Do you have an iPad? I said, yeah. He said, put it on your iPad and read from your iPad, because then you don't hear pages turning. Because the microphone that he's using in this soundproof booth is so sensitive. I mean, at one time I had skipped breakfast. I don't know what happened. I was late. I didn't eat anything. And I'm in the booth and he goes, what's that? And I go, I'm a bit hungry. The microphone is so sensitive. My tummy was going, grrr. He could pick it up. So we had to stop. He gave me a granola bar and said, okay, now go back in. And what was really interesting is in the last session, he discovered something, because I'm not a professional narrator. So I tend to make what he calls mouth noises. I know what he means. And apparently eating green apple in between takes, or if your mouth is dry, not just sipping water, there's some kind of acid in it and it affects the mouth and you make less mouth noises, and apparently it works. So every time I go to record, I'm going to be taking a green apple all chopped up with me. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to hold it up because it's so broken. It's so awkward to hold the broken book. This was chapter 9, What's Taking You So Long? Tuesday evening, May 25th, 1971, Maya Perez, the well-known psychic from Balboa, California, was in Dallas, Texas to give a lecture on reincarnation and visualization. Maya is a noted lecturer as well as a psychic. Please also note that whenever I find spelling errors or grammatical errors in Helene's work, I have been fixing them, but I don't change the tone of her voice. So what I'm reading now may change a word or two later in the PDF because I fixed her grammar. But this is pretty close. Jess Stern's book, Door to the Future, relates some of Maya's impressions and predictions. After a most interesting lecture, a question and answer session followed. During this portion of the program, Maya beckoned me from the audience to come on stage and share with the audience some of the impressions she was picking up about me. I was seated in the front row at the program. Maya claims she picked up some information. She picks up information about a person while being in a person's vibrations. And that's what happens when I'm reading for Audible. Sometimes I'll make a mistake and I'll be up and he'll go, okay, we'll do it again. And he'll cut me in on the sentence and I'll read it again. And then we keep going. It's kind of fun, actually, even though occasionally it's a little frustrating, but I'm getting better at enunciation. Well, here we go. It seems the expression, nothing is hidden that shall not be revealed, comes home to me more and more as I meet with unusual psychic people. One of the first things Maya commented on was the fact that I was in the process of losing a great deal of weight. She said I had the discipline to control the tendency to be a compulsive eater when I am frustrated. You will accomplish nothing by continuing to blame your present obesity on emotional frustration, she stressed. Within several months, you will have a slim, trim figure. She had no way of knowing I had already begun my program to diet to lose 25 pounds, quick-like before a trip I was planning to take in August. I admitted to Maya that I indeed was in the process of shedding 25 pounds of excess weight. From 170 pounds, I hide my head in shame. I think she meant I hung my head in shame. I wanted to slim down to 140 pounds by trip time sometime in August. But of course I would lose the weight by trip time, and I was really pleased to hear her confirm my convictions. For the reader who has a weight problem, might I share a technique that probably is the one most beneficial factor in my dieting program? I have, or should I say I had, an insatiable appetite for sweets. I did fine for several days on cheese, meat, and vegetables, but sometimes the urge for candy became so strong I made a trip to the candy counter for chocolate-covered peanuts and ate until I was satisfied. That, of course, blew my diet. So I'm admitting I am immature and somehow need to be reminded that I am in control of the body and the body does not control me. The technique that reminded me I was in control of all eating goes like this. First, I made a list of the foods that tempt me. The high-calorie items such as chocolate-covered peanuts, ice cream, nut brownies, and caramel sauces happen to appeal to my taste buds. Second, I closed my eyes and mentally imagined I saw myself rejecting all the calorie-packed goodies that were not included on my diet program. 3, rather than deprive myself and not eat when I had the craving for sweets, I mentally replaced the high-calorie items with crisp carrot sticks, cool thin cucumber slices, and sweet wedges of cantaloupe. I imagined the low-calorie items were much tastier than the high-calorie items. In other words, I was conning myself for a calorie countdown. I did this mental exercise during the day or whenever I felt tempted to those no calorie counters. Might I say that this technique is so effective, I'm able to resist successfully all the foods I once craved. Today, 2 weeks later, I've lost 10 pounds by following my diet program. Might I suggest you program yourself with this technique often, because what you actually are doing is replacing one habit with another, and it takes repeated practice to incorporate it into your consciousness. Now, remember, at the beginning of the book, she has her 3-step program to manifest. 1 is set a goal. 2, oh my goodness, 2 just popped out of my head. And 3 was you can con yourself into anything. Now I have to go read 2. Yeah, I talk about this book so much. You think I would have it memorized, but for some reason, 2, know what you want. That's step 1. 2, never entertain doubts. How did I forget that? But 3, you can con yourself into anything by repeating it over and over again until you incorporate it into your thinking. That is the way it is. Sometimes it takes longer, but I found it is very, very effective, surefire method once you incorporate it into your conscious thinking program. So she is repeating that in this chapter. There are many diets and hundreds of books written on the subject, but whatever program you happen to follow and you have a hang up on the sweet bit as I did, you better believe that this technique works. Getting on with Maya's other impressions as she tuned in on me, I found this statement to be the most interesting. She said I was to be a great spiritual writer. In fact, that was my purpose this lifetime. As I mentioned earlier, she believes in reincarnation. Fact is, I'm presently writing a book, the one you are now reading, about my personal experiences. I found this statement doubly interesting because this is not the first time I was told I would be writing. I must share an experience that could have been responsible for planting a seed in my subconscious many years ago, and I'm now acting upon that suggestion. When I was 16 years old, I was confined in bed for 3 months due to rheumatic fever that racked my body with pain. At that time, 1940, medical science had little to offer a person that had this serious and sometimes fatal disease. 2 of my classmates also had the malady at the same time I was confined. One died of the disease, and the other boy lived 5 years before he too died of heart valve damage. At that time, only bed rest and pain-killing drugs were the treatment to keep fever down and to dull pain. I was brought up in a very religious, church-oriented environment. In fact, for 8 years, I attended parochial. I would do this sometimes. I would get the producer to play the word on the computer with the pronunciation. Parochial school, taught by nuns. I went to mass every morning. I went to confession every Friday and was taught we live in sin. If we ate meat on Friday, or if we missed mass on Sunday, or a church holiday, holy day of obligation, we committed a mortal sin. I was made aware of purgatory, where one might burn in a fire until one's sins are all cleansed, or worse than that, I would go to hell if I died with a mortal sin in my soul. Of course, I swallowed all this hook, line, and thinker. You remember, she loves to use her puns. You see, I didn't know any better. I prayed to get well as I lay in bed, but there was no change. I had a perfect horror of dying because I wasn't sure about having a clean bill of thoughts to make heaven, and just the idea that I might have a mortal sin and the possibility of going to hell or purgatory sent me into hysterics. After 3 months of pain and little or no improvement, one morning I overheard the family doctor, he made 2 house calls a week to look in on me, tell my mother that my heart was indicating damage and he could do very little more for me. That night, I mustered up all the courage a 16-year-old frightened girl can gather, and I decided I wanted to die. I gave it serious thought, for I was weary of constant pain and tired of the bed. Why, even if I did have to go to purgatory for a spell and get burned for a bit, I could still get into heaven eventually, I told myself. Anything would be better than continuing in this situation with the outlook of death from this disease. Anyway, that is what I told myself, that the following morning I wanted to die. I just mentally set up the idea. I thought about it all night long, and I didn't change my mind when the light of morning appeared. That morning, I verbally uttered out loud, "Okay, if there is a God or an angel near, I want you to know I am now ready to die. I'm tired of being in pain and not getting any better. So there's only one thing left, to die. And I don't want you to drag this out any longer. I want to die. Do you hear me?" Well, what do you know? Someone heard me, or so it seemed. For as soon as I made the demand to die, there appeared a rather young, serene-looking man. At first I thought, wow, what fast service. Somebody is already here to pick me up. Heavens no. I wasn't in heaven, and the cool, calm, collected young man wasn't Jesus. Of that I was positive. The figure did have a rather bright yellow glow about him. He reminded me of one of the holy pictures of saints I was given by the nuns when I made good grades in school. The young man standing at the foot of my bed had such an air of peace and love radiating from him. I was startled for a moment, but I do recall that I had no fear of his presence. A man in my bedroom bit. What do you know? He was not there to take me away. He merely said, "What makes you think you are going to die, little girl? You've too much to live for and too much to do." He was real, or so it seemed to my mind's eye, so I started a conversation with him. I was still determined to die, for I remember asking, "Just what can I do tied to this bed?" He then smiled and replied, "You are healed, and you will return to your studies. Later in life, you'll be inspired to write many experiences so that many will learn from you. This is the purpose for your life, and you will be guided when that time comes." Then he seemed to fade away as if disappearing through a wall. Well, you better believe I was one excited teenager. I yelled for my mother to come quickly. After I related the experience and insisted that a man actually was here and said I was healed, she came to the bedside table, opened up the drawer, took out the thermometer to take my temperature. It happened to be normal. She then looked rather strangely at me and made me promise not to tell anyone, for it sounded crazy. It was only a dream. Thinking back at the incident, she may have been concerned that my mind was being affected by the illness. The following morning, my feet touched the floor for the first time in 3 months. Within the week, I joined the family at the dinner table, and the following week, I was back in school. I pushed the incident to the back of my mind and told no one. In all the following years, I never thought of the experience again. If I did, I probably promptly dismissed it. The first of this year, 1971, I had a strong impression to write a book about my contest-winning experiences, hoping it might in some way clue people in that we all have the ability to use wishcraft. My intentions were to keep the book serious, sometimes silly, and occasionally sermonette-ish, for that is how I express myself. I like to be sunny and punny, for as far as I'm concerned, there is enough humglum, Doomsville, USA mental energy around. As I sat at the typewriter in my study typing my experiences for the book, I kept looking at the blank wall in front of me so I could capture the appropriate words to express my thoughts. One evening, my eyes seemed to play tricks, for I saw what appeared to be a young man, a gentle, calm, serene expression with outstretched arms and eyes turned towards the sky. He seemed to be emanating a feeling of being pleased about something, as if the floodgates were opened. The memory and recognition of this vision rushed towards my conscious mind. There is so much we do not yet know about the mind, memory, and imagination. So at this time, I have no logical explanation of what brought this about. Some might say I was hallucinating. Others might think I was illuminated and might declare me a saint. 'Tis all still a big question mark what actually happened. I will continue to seek answers to many of the questions that arise daily. The following evening, I had a repeat visit of the vision, and this time I hurriedly sketched my impression of the figure on a sheet of paper. The following morning, I found myself at the lumber yard buying a sheet of plywood, 3 by 5 in size. I then stopped at an art supply shop to buy 4 tubes of oil paint. White, yellow, black, and tan were the only colors I felt impressed to buy. I certainly am not an artist, but I had a very strong urge to try my hand at painting a study of my visitor. I got the idea to fold a double sheet of newspaper lengthwise. Taking scissors, I began cutting, sort of as I did as a child, cutting out half paper dolls and then unfolding the sheet to complete the figure. The result in this instance was a silhouette of a man, halo and all. I then traced the paper figure on the board and was quite impressed with the results, for it was a very good likeness of my visitor. Then the thought occurred, what about details such as the expression of eyes, background, and details? It will come, I kept thinking. It came. For 3 nights, I had completed the picture. For in 3 nights, I had completed the painting. I even sketched in impressions of other figures I had imagined I'd seen at various times in my dreams. Teachers in the classroom of learning seemed to be the appropriate title for the painting. I now try to analyze if perhaps I've seen a similar picture in one of the many museums I visited while in Europe. That might be a logical explanation how I came about painting the picture. I do so wish I had more answers, for I am sure some of you may have had similar experiences and too have had the question. Hopefully, as time passes, I might be enlightened on much of what is happening. A most interesting incident occurred after I hung the picture. I have it displayed in a very prominent place in my home. We had guests one evening, and a gentleman commented on the painting. Now, be aware of what I say here, and I'll have an explanation after the chapter. Helen, no man is perfect, yet I'm intrigued as to how perfectly you have both sides of this figure. He did not know about my cutout technique. I uttered the first thought that came, perhaps in defense, for I said, what makes you think this man is in a physical body? He is perfect only to me, for that is the way I saw him. Are we all not striving for perfection and balance? Perhaps if we can acquire a balance and maintain it, we too can possess a perfect physical body. You know, that's a good thing to strive for, isn't it? 'Tis interesting when Maya commented on the fact I would be doing spiritual writing. I certainly can't call this book spiritual, perhaps spirited might be a better word. Maya also claimed that in one lifetime she and I were sisters, also that we had the same knowledge of truth. Another interesting observation I feel I must share with you. While Maya was talking, she kept stressing visualization and repeated many of the concepts I lecture on in my series of positive thinking programs. One last comment she made, you will be going to Egypt within several years. There you will meet 2 persons. I must refer to them as masters, for you will be given many answers by these masters to enable you to better understand. After meeting with these masters, you will start writing in earnest with a sincere, dedicated purpose. This comment I found most interesting. For several years ago, I announced to my husband that I wanted to visit Egypt and India. I even have a set date of August in 1972 to make the trip. Now, isn't life exciting when you have a vivid imagination? In closing this chapter, I must repeat, anything I can do, you can do better. I firmly believe it. I recall reading that Jesus was said to have uttered, all these things I do, you can do and more. That is said that he walked on water, healed the sick, mastered bilocation, and was most proficient in the practice of precipitation, multiplying the loaves and fishes, changing the water into wine. Gads, what a challenge we are facing. I have only one suggestion at this time. What is taking us so long? So that is the missing chapter. So that is very interesting. So the PDF will be available for you to download. So you can have that chapter and that story. But again, if you've read the mirror reflection, it in contact with other realms, you've already heard that story. So I think because it was much more spiritual than contesty, Tag and Helene decided to take it out of this book because she had so much more contest information in this book that she wrote that chapter seemed superfluous. And so it ended up in another book, which is really interesting that she talks about the messenger. And I just realized I didn't pull that book out because on the original cover, oops, that's my cover. On the original cover is that messenger that she painted. And so you can see what he looks like there. You can see his eyes are looking up and his hands are outstretched and how even he is. He's even on both sides there. And you can see the other people she painted. There you go. And if you haven't read In Contact with Other Realms, I frequently give away copies. If you go to contestqueen.com, my alter ego, which is where I host the contests, you can win copies of the book. I give them away every month in different formats, sometimes on live streams, sometimes on blog posts. And so you can check out both Contest Queen and Words for Winning for many winning opportunities and opportunities to learn from Helene Hadsell, and in the near future from Tag Powell, and then eventually Judith Powell, because I bought the rights to her books too. So it's going to be very exciting as all these books are republished and made available to the public once more. If you have any questions, you can email me at questions@wordsforwinning.com, and stay tuned for another episode of Words for Winning.